I don't know, about 10 or 15 years ago, we were bouncing around the idea of, man, we have so many great vintage guitars and they're all kind of stuffed up under people's beds and in closets and everything, and what a kind of what a shame that is that we can't get those out, and that we really need to get those out and share them where people could they could breathe and people could enjoy them.
We collectively said, why don't we put on a show that that shows off some of the best guitars that we own. I have a huge collection. Joe has a collection, and Aubrey does too. And we just thought, instead of keeping these great guitars in our homes, why don't we put them on display for everyone to come and look at? And so that's how Guitarfest got started. It took us a long time to get around to doing it, but boy, was it worthwhile.
As a guitar repairman and collector, I had known Aubrey and Paul for years and talked to these guys after every guitar show about the fact that it would be really cool to have, instead of the kind of guitar show we know, which is a bunch of, basically a flea market, a bunch of instruments that are set out on benches with price tags and some good stuff, some bad stuff. We had a guitar show where nothing was for sale. In other words, a one-day museum.
And I think probably what got us going, as I remember back with Paul and Joe, was we had talked about this idea, and then somebody invited us to a, quote, vintage guitar show, and we went with expectation that it was really going to be great, and it was awful. They had just, it was kind of a joke, and so I think there was a side of it, maybe it was ego, whatever it was just like guys with their race car, their muscle cars or whatever. I think I kind of remember we kind of said, well, what we need to do is show them what a real guitar show is, and let's just do it. Let's do it purely for the love of guitars.
The instrument concept was pretty simple. Get the coolest stuff we knew and try to get focused parts of people's collections.
We'll get all of our guitars out. Paul and Joe have, great old guitars, and I have some that are pretty cool. And then, people like Rick Vito in the neighborhood, and then of course there's Larry Carlton, and there's, just Vince Gill, and there's a long list of people that we know. And of course Joe Glazer, being the Guitar Fix-It guy, he knows everybody in guitars, not only in Nashville but everywhere. So
we had instruments coming from all over the country, from friends who were collectors, from people that just heard about it and would call us and say, hey, I've got a 1959 Les Paul Standard with a tremendous flame top. Are you interested?
It's kind of started out just like a couple of kids wanting to build a tree house, and it kind of became something much bigger. And once we got into it, I think our mantra became kind of like P.T. Barnum, the go big or go home kind of thing.
So it was around 100 instruments of carefully chosen little featured groups, little specialized featured groups, and it was pretty amazing. I mean, when we had it all together, when Paul and I set it up, and we walked around and looked at it, I was blown away, even though I'd been living with it already for 2 or 3 weeks, plotting it, and actually had most of them, or a good half of them, at my house the night before.
We set them up in the Leipers Creek Art Gallery in Leipers Fork, a wonderful, beautiful location to display these incredible works of art.
The day ended up, of course, being very exciting and just pulled from all directions, and at the same time I did get to walk in here and see these guitars and share in the I'm talking about 4th grade excitement of a bunch of guys that are some of the most tainted guitar collectors in the world. They've seen it all, done it all, and they typically kind of look cynically at things. They weren't cynical on that day. They were in here, and they were just like a bunch of teenagers that had just gotten their first guitar, if you know what that feeling's like.
It's interesting. I mean, half this thing was about music, but let's talk about the guitars first. And Brent Mayer we asked him to bring his cat's eye Gretches. He has a collection of wartime, Second World War Gretsch archtops with the cat's eye sound holes, which are really very cool. And he's got one that, as far as we know, is such a prototype that they hadn't decided whether the cat's eye would be a teardrop facing down or the other way up, and that was in the collection. So his collection, his entries weren't all his Gretsch guitars, but a focused part of it.
We had a complete set of Lloyd Law instruments, the only complete set anywhere.
These are rare instruments made in the mid-20s, late 20s. And I don't doubt that he's the only human in the world, the only person in the world who has this. But in any case, most people would never see these together. They'd be lucky to see one of these. These are really the Stradivari of mandolins and Gibsons. So this was an incredible thing.
Instruments were coming from celebrities. We had Johnny Cash's 1939 D45, of course Larry Carlton's ES335, and just instruments that were coming out of the woodwork at us. And every single one of them would make the cornerstone of a fabulous collection. And there we were with 100 of the best instruments anywhere.
You know, this is hundreds of thousands of dollars of guitars, and Marty Stewart lent me the D45, the wartime D45, or pre-war, which by itself is probably worth several $100,000. But you add to it the provenance of Marty owning it, and that before him, Johnny Cash owned it and gave it to him. And before that, it is thought by some to have belonged to Hank Williams Sr. Anyway, we put this together, part guitar show and then part music. And the music was something that Paul and I largely did together, thinking about knowing that there's thousands of world-class players in Nashville. What is the neatest stuff we could do? And so we tried to gather representative guitar music and figure out what that might be. And that was a little bit out of the blues, and sort of for a rustic blues, we picked Colin Linden for one, and Paul brought in a friend of his from, I guess, New York. And we had a jazz trio, the three baddest guys in town, Mel Deal and Andy Reese and Jack Pearson, and had them play together. And all around town, there were these little stages, really wonderful stuff. And I had a bunch of other people who were just coming out to visit. Vince Gill and Brad Paisley was on his way, and these guys were going to inevitably ended up sitting in. This would have been, not to just talk about what would have been, but it would have been an amazing thing. It was a great thing. There was great music, even though it was raining like crazy, and even though only 400 of the expected 10,000 people made it out there.
And then, of course, at the same time, we had the show of the best guitarists in the world congregating in Leipers Fork to play some of these instruments and to show us exactly what these guitars can do. Of course, Larry Carlton was there, Robin Ford, Jack Pierce, the classical guitar virtuoso. Virginia Lucas was here from New York. Guthrie Trapp came to play. Reggie Young, the incredible Reggie Young, was there for the day. And all over town, every single store in Leipers Fork was full of the most amazing guitar playing I've ever heard anywhere. And all of this was put on for free. It didn't cost anything to attend. It didn't cost anything to listen to this music or to enjoy these wonderful guitars. And it was done really out of our passion for guitars and for the people that can make them sing. And that's what Leipers Fork Guitarfest was all about. It was an incredible day. In fact, two incredible things happened in Leipers Fork on that day. Not only the Guitar Fest of these wonderful, iconic guitars and the amazing people that play them, but what is quite possibly the worst historic flood ever.
As we got into this thing, it kind of naturally evolved into who was going to do what. And, Joe, of course, was the most knowledgeable about guitars. How do you get more knowledgeable than Joe Glazer about guitars? So he really got very, very involved on certain guitars and getting the guitars here and getting them in their places.
I was particularly responsible for the instruments. Paul was going to be the MC, and Aubrey was essentially the bullet who got everything done.
And Paul was also responsible for doing the stage, and he's a great MC and charms everybody with that English accent. So he was responsible for kind of producing this over-the-top show that just kept getting more over the top when people would volunteer. Because in the neighborhood with all these guitar players around, they heard that Larry Carlton was going to be here, and Robin Ford and Jack Pearson and a few of them. Well, it doesn't take much of that for all the guitar players in Nashville. Vince Gill and Kev Moe and all of them hear about it. Well, you don't have to ask them about. I mean, they don't ask how much they're going to get paid. They get in their car and come down here, and they want to get on the stage and play. So we had this just amazing guitar show. It was just overrunning with guitar players.
But just to have Larry Carlton and Robin Ford as our headliners was remarkable. These are two of the absolute best players in the world, and great players together and great human beings, and they did this to be good to Leipers Fork. We couldn't believe our luck when this happened, that they agreed to do this.
People actually showed up to view the guitars. Larry Carlton showed up, Robin Ford showed up. So many great guitarists actually showed up and played, even though no one quite knew how they were going to get home.
My responsibility was more kind of the infrastructure, the politics of being sure that everybody got in here safely, connecting with, we're very good friends with a really great sheriff in this county, and he personally was involved in helping escort some of the instruments here, like the Lloyd Loar set was brought in by police escort.
To have gotten up at 11 in the morning and seeing it rain and watch it rain more and more, and hear everybody come by predicting 15 inches of rain, knowing that this incredible venue of music might not be heard by all the people who would get to hear it and get to hear it for free. It was really a discouraging thing.
It rained 13 inches in one day. The streets were flooded, cars were sailing down the street, tornadoes were coming.
A few days beforehand, still thinking that this was the greatest idea in the world, that we would have wonderful fun, it started to occur to me that I had a tremendous number of instruments, not only mine, which I've always been responsible for and have insured, but historically important and incredibly valuable instruments that belong to other people. Two instruments of Vince Gill's that are an 1868 Martin in beautiful shape, and another OM45, I guess it was. These are, this is hundreds of thousands of dollars of guitars.
And of course, we'd had the big thing earlier in the week about insurance, and we're thinking, man, we're going to get all this insurance, and there's nothing on earth that could happen.
It started to occur to me, I started thinking, I've got a lot of exposure here, but what could go wrong? And sure enough, we found out what could go wrong.
And then we got news that there was the storm, so we start talking to emergency management the night before, and we were going to do, of course, an outdoor concert, and we got Clare Brothers to donate all the they donated all the equipment, so we got this huge PA system and everything donated for an outdoor deal. So hour by hour, we're talking to our emergency management guy about what's the weather, what's going to happen, and it got worse, and then it looked like it might get better. And that morning, we had to make the call at about 9 o'clock as to whether we were going to go ahead and take it to the rec center, which was a lesser venue, but it was inside, or whether we were going to go ahead and do it outside. Well, you never know what's going to happen with the rain. And of course, we want to have good attitude and expect the sun to come out. At the same time, we don't want to fly right into the Rocky Mountains with the weather. So our emergency management guy for the county told us that, it looked like it could open up, but it could get bad, and that the emergency management people he was talking to said we probably ought to call it off just to be safe. And we almost decided to go ahead, but then at the last minute we said, no, we're going to go ahead and move all that gear. So we put it all up at the rec center, and we got all that Clare Brothers set up, and whatever.
Everybody who put this together, all the people in Leipers Fork, went through a tremendous amount of work, and with optimism that this was going to be the coolest day ever. And it was a wonderful experience doing this. And I wish that for all those people and for all the players, all the 20 or 24 players who had committed to coming out and playing for free on this day for the benefit of people who loved guitar and loved music, I wish that this had worked out.
Well, sure enough, here comes the weather. And by about, I forget what it was, it just got worse and worse, and we're watching the rain, and it's pretty novel at first. And of course, a lot of people have gotten here, and they're seeing the guitars, fortunately. And we're thinking, boy, this is just a good, Gully Washer, Tennessee rainstorm. And then it gets worse, and then pretty soon we start seeing the floods come in around. And the floods get worse, and we go down to the road, and pretty soon we're seeing the water come up to the edge of the road at the entrance of town. And that's the highest I've ever seen it. And you think, certainly it can't go any higher. And about that time, about 20 minutes later, we see it coming up over the road. And right before our very eyes, we become an island. And then we have all these people out here that start realizing they're on an island, and you really can't even get out of Leipers Fork on any side. And then that causes panic among people that aren't even from here. And so they're literally in their cars. Our friends that have guitars, some of them from up in East Nashville, and they're running from one side of town to the other in their cars like rats trying to jump off a ship before the ship moves away from land. And so we calmed them down, and somewhere along in there, the sheriff, who was also trapped out here on the island with us, he was command central for this, what ended up being the 1,000-year flood in the Nashville area. He was kind of obviously in charge of forces throughout the county, but he was right here beside us in the radio. He pulls me aside here in the art gallery and says, Aubrey, I got to tell you something. And he pulls me over to the side and says, Aubrey, we have a tornado warning coming at the building. And I take a second take, and I said, a tornado watch or a tornado warning? He says, a tornado warning.
And as the sheriff rushed in and told us there was a tornado on its way, beating down on Leipers Fork, they took all the people that were milling around in the gallery and put them in the basement across the street in something of a storm shelter, except for the 3 sheriff's deputies who were sworn to stay in there, and myself. And we sat in there, joked around about the fact that we might have an aerial view of Leipers Fork pretty soon. But I knew that if something happened to those guitars and if I wasn't carried off with them, that I would never live it down. So, especially since that's what I do for a living, and I had sworn to my friends that their instruments would be in safekeeping.
So the likelihood of all these guitars once in a lifetime coming together, and then actually on that day there is a tornado warning. There is a tornado coming right at all of these guitars in this building. And I said to the sheriff, well, what do we do with all these people? Should we move them over under the buildings over there? He said, no, there's not enough room. He said, we just have to sit it out. So we sat here and watched as a tornado warning was in place, and the tornado passed right over us.
And so Paul said, Joe, I can't do a British accent. He said, you stay with the gallery with the instruments, and I'm going to go run the live venue, which was originally going to be outside, but we quickly moved it indoors. And you stay with those guitars, which I understood was my responsibility.
Then I get a call somewhere along that time from our sound guy, who's in control of the sound over at the rec center. and the rain is just going crazy, and people are running up and down the road, and I'm out there in a raincoat. I'm just so trying to calm people down, whatever. And I get this call from our sound guy, and he says, "Man, we need to call the show off." And I was like, "Okay, well, you know, we're here, we're on the island, we got all these guitar players, and you got all the gear. I mean, you know, and they can't go anywhere." And he said, "Well, Larry, they've already, you know, Carlton thinks we need to pull it, and some of his players have already pulled the plugs." And I said, "Well, you know, whatever he said," he said, "Let me put Larry on the phone." So I talked to Larry, and Larry said, "Well, you know, we could play, but looks like they've already disconnected." I said, "Well, shoot, you know, we're here. You're in the place. We got water all the way around us, you know. They played the violins on the Titanic when it was going down, you know." They looked around and said, "What can we do?" And it's my understanding they went ahead and played. So not that we're going down, but it just, you know, it seems like maybe we ought to go ahead and play. But whatever you think. So I hung up the phone, figuring that the concert was shut down.
One of the funny things that occurred because of this tremendous flood was that no one could leave Leipers Fork. So that everyone that was there was pretty much trapped, couldn't leave. And so we said, "Hey, let the show go on." So we wired up the amplifiers, plugged them in, turned them on.
And about an hour later, people are coming in here saying, "Man, that was an unbelievable show." And I was like, "What show?" He said, "Well, the show went on." And later they told me that right after I hung up the phone and they had disconnected the PA and whatever, somebody started playing and jamming. Next thing you know, everybody just started, the players couldn't stand it, so they just started playing. Next thing you know, all the PA guys just start hooking it back up. And they had a once in a lifetime in the flood. Larry Carlton, Robin Ford, Jack Pearson, Virginia Luca. I'm not. There was a big long list of players that came and played. I think Vince might have played with them some.
And we were treated to what I think is quite possibly some of the best guitar music ever played anywhere.
I missed it. I was out directing traffic in the rain. But quite a dramatic day. Very dynamic set of events to have a 1,000-year flood and have a once in a lifetime occurrence of guitars, which I love.
I myself enjoyed it so much, and I was so grateful and so thankful for the participation of all these people. And that's my takeaway from the thing, is that we had a great time.
It was a pretty exciting day of my life. I probably won't forget it. So
You could not have scripted a more historic day than what took place in Leipers Fork on May the 1st.
it ended up just being astounding in terms of the quality of it. And I think certainly a one-of-a-kind occurrence where this particular group of guitars has never come together and probably will never be together again. And it just freaked everybody involved out.
Ultimately, what we ended up with in Leipers Fork was, I'm going to say, quite possibly one of the greatest collections of vintage guitars anywhere in the world.
Just to get to look at the instruments, and to sneak across the street a little bit and hear other people play, but just to get to hear some of the music and see these instruments absolutely blew my jaded mind. I mean, I've seen so many guitars. This is what I do all day long. I repair them, I work on people's collections, and yet to see that group of extremely rare things, many of which, there were 15 things there that I'd never seen in my life, or that I'd seen one of, and they were all sitting there right next to each other, and another 30 that were extremely rare and in such good condition that people thought they were new. This was just amazing.
I want to thank everybody that was involved in it, you know, that contributed so much. There were so many people that contributed guitars that trusted us. Maybe they shouldn't have, but they trusted us with, you know, in some cases $1 million guitars, trusted us, and really just gave us a blank check of trust that we would take care of their instruments. I guess they knew if something happened to them, Joe would fix them for free. But of course, a lot of them couldn't be necessarily fixed to the conditions that they were in. But so many people that put so much into it to pull it all together, and it was truly a magical day. It's my understanding, I'm not an expert on these kind of events, but it's my understanding there's never been anything quite like it.
You know, an event of this magnitude, of this size, doesn't happen just because we want it to happen. It happened because a lot of people put in the blood, sweat, and tears to make it happen. People like Joe Glazer and Aubrey Preston, of course Roy Snow, Gary Ciramelli, Robbie Calvo, people like the artists that came to play, Larry Carlton, Robin Ford, Jack Pearson, and Virginia Luque, who gave up their time for no pay to come and play for this incredible event. Ronnie Proler, who probably has one of the finest collection of vintage instruments in the country, bought some amazing instruments, including Eric Clapton's Explorer. I mean, it doesn't get much cooler than that. The list goes on and on and on of the people that gave up their time and volunteered to help out on this historic day in the most adverse conditions you could possibly imagine. And that's why the day was a resounding success on all levels.
I myself enjoyed it so much, and I was so grateful and so thankful for the participation of all these people. And that's my takeaway from the thing, is that we had a great time.
We're so happy that somebody cared enough to push us to get this on tape. That guy's named Rich Armentrout, and he's standing over there behind the camera right now, so thanks, Rich. He cared enough to come out here at no cost to document this and capture something that really you know, millions of people ought to be able to have the opportunity to see what happened on this day, and we're so happy to be able to share that with everybody.
I can't thank everybody enough that volunteered and gave their services to our Guitarfest festival, all for free. So again, thanks to every single person that helped. I think this was a once-in-a-lifetime event. I know I will probably never witness music like this, so I hope you enjoyed what you saw today.
Virginia, originally from Cadiz in Spain, now lives in New York City. Just got back from Argentina, where she played with the orchestra down there. Is about to go off to Italy and play with the Berlin Orchestra. Incredible talent. You know, one night it's Carnegie Hall, and the next night it's Leipers Fork in the pouring rain. But anyway, listen, please give it up for Virginia Luque. Nobody in this whole world is more excited than me right now because I am this guy's hugest fan. Please, Mr. Larry Carlton.
At the bass, Travis Carlton.
You done your daddy dirty. He don't want you around no more. Don't let the sun catch you lying. Lying at my back door. Your daddy's done turned salty. Yes, 'cause you made him feel so sore. You can cry, cry, cry. Yes, and baby, you can wail. Beat your head on the pavement. Yeah, till a man comes, lands you in jail. Don't let the sun catch you lying. Lying at my back door. Your daddy's done turned salty, and he don't want you around no more. You can cry, cry, cry. Yes, and baby, you can wail. Beat your head on the pavement. Yeah, till a man comes, lands you in jail. Don't let the sun catch you crying. Crying at my front door. You done your daddy dirty. He don't want you around no more. Your daddy's done turned salty, and I don't want you around no more.
Thank you very much.